Hello my lovelies, I hope you're all well. Today we are looking at shocking World War II weapons you've never heard of. So this is from the channel They Will Kill You. Let's have a look, shall we?
From tiny fleas to giant tanks, here are 9 of the most shocking weapons used in World War II. Number 1 was actually built and used in battle. Number 9. The V3 cannon. The V1 and V2 were deadly German missiles that pulverized London during the Blitzkrieg. Following those two was a much larger and powerful V3. It was a massive 400-foot-long super gun built into a limestone hill in northern France and was planned to be used to bombard London. A series of propellant charges were positioned along the length of the V3 cannon's barrel to provide additional boost to the projectiles as they were fired. This extra power allowed a maximum firing range of 165 kilometers, enough to cross the English Channel from France to London. Hitler authorized the development of 50 of such cannons. However, before its completion, the V3 unit in France was damaged by British air raids, rendering it unusable. 2 smaller V3 units were built in Lambton, Germany, but only one was used in the war. In 1945, some 183 rounds of the supergun were fired on Luxembourg, which had recently been taken over by the Allies. However, the weapon didn't live up to the hopes of the Germans and killed only a small number of Allied soldiers. Number 8. Unrotated projectiles. The unrotated projectile was an anti-aircraft weapon developed by the British Royal Navy and used during the early days of World War II. They were short-ranged rockets fired from ships with wires and parachutes attached. Upon reaching an elevation of 300 meters, the launched rockets would slowly drift down, creating an aerial minefield. Enemy aircrafts flying through the area would risk pulling a wire and have a rocket come towards them and explode upon impact. The idea looked really good on paper, but in reality, the unrotated projectiles had many problems. The slowly drifting rockets could fall anywhere due to unpredictable winds, and even land on the British ships they were launched from. The projectiles and its parachutes were also clearly visible to enemy pilots from a distance, who had no problem steering away from them. Number 7.
Idea.
Suicide anti-tank dogs. In what seemed as a desperate attempt to fight the advances of German tanks, the Soviets came up with one of the most bizarre and cruel weapons anyone could think of. Dogs were trained to move to enemy tanks and armored vehicles with a bomb strapped onto their bodies, which upon detonation would disable their targets at the cost of the poor animals' lives. The training of these suicide dogs involved keeping them hungry for long periods and having food placed under tanks to lure them there. The strapped explosives were designed with a vertical lever jutting out that would easily latch on to the hull of a tank, triggering its detonation. However, the idea proved not very practical in real combat. The K9 soldiers easily got scared of enemy gunfire and came running back to their Russian owners, sometimes detonating the explosives. In training, the dogs were used to diving under immobile vehicles and refused to go under moving German tanks. Some retreated and went under Russian tanks, which they were more familiar with. German soldiers who realized the tactic began to shoot any dogs on sight. Although a number of German tanks were put out of action by the suicide K9 squad, the idea proved to be overall ineffective. Number 6.
That pisses me off. And I hope it pisses you off too.
Goliath tracked mines. Unlike their Soviet enemies who used dogs to deliver explosives under tanks, the Germans resorted to remote-controlled mini-tanks called Goliaths. Contrary to their name, the little track mines were anything but Goliath-like in size and were dubbed the Doodlebug by Americans. The idea originally came after the Germans recovered a prototype of a French-designed miniature track vehicle in the north of France. They then managed to reverse-engineer the device and create their own tracking vehicle controlled remotely with the joystick and capable of carrying up to 100 kilograms of explosives.
Looks kind of similar to the modern day IED robot thing.
were meant to slide under the hulls of tanks to deliver explosive payloads to where the vehicles were most vulnerable. Early models of the mini-tank were powered by electric motors, but were later replaced with cheaper and more reliable gas engines. The Germans also managed to upgrade the cable-controlled models to wireless radio control. More than 7,000 units were produced and deployed on the East and West fronts as anti-tank weapons since early 1942. They were, however, rather costly and moved at a low speed of just above 6 miles per hour. Still, the idea was advanced for its time, and the Goliath track mines are considered precursors to modern-day robots.
See?
Number 5. Xclass submarines. Mini-tanks weren't the only ingenious miniature vehicle deployed in World War II. The British Royal Navy built a series of tiny submarines, only 15 meters long, called the Xclass.
That just looking at that makes me feel claustrophobic. No.
These submarines fitted a crew of only 4 people and were designed to be launched towards a target area by a normal-sized submarine. The idea was that after infiltrating a target area underwater, the small submarines would then attach timed explosive devices below the hull of an enemy ship. They would then make their escape and meet up with the mother submarine.
That just sounds dangerous. Like, needlessly dangerous.
Watching as the powerful blast from the bomb sink the unsuspecting enemy vessel. Some of the X-class submarines played important roles throughout the war. During D-Day, some of them served as survey vehicles that infiltrated the area beforehand, and some acted as light ships to help the invasion fleet land on the correct beaches. The X-class were later succeeded by the revised XE-class submarines deployed in the Far East. Number 4. Oka kamikaze planes. As the Pacific Theater was favoring more and more towards the Americans, the losing Japanese Imperial Army resorted to the most desperate of measures. In a last-ditch effort to turn the tide of war, they developed suicide attack planes known as Oka, which meant cherry blossom. American soldiers jokingly called it Baka, meaning stupid. The Oka was essentially just a large piloted bomb rather than an actual aircraft. It was unable to take off or fly on its own, had no landing gear, and was armed with a 1,200-kilogram warhead. It was carried to a target area by a larger bomber plane and dropped once in range. The suicide pilot would then steer the Oka towards an enemy ship, boost the plane's speed with 3 solid fuel rockets, and hit the target at tremendous speed, diving down at a speed.
You gotta believe in your cause to be willing to blow yourself up. Hey? You gotta really believe in your cause for that.
650 kilometers per hour, the Oka is almost impossible to shoot down with anti-aircraft weapons. To the Americans fighting them, the Japanese suicidal act seemed cruel and barbaric. However, giving up one's life instead of surrendering was something rooted in Japanese culture and deemed more honorable. More than 800 Oka units were manufactured, but only few used, as most were being stockpiled in anticipation of the oncoming Allied invasion of Japan. This, however, did not happen, as Japan surrendered unconditionally following the events at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Number 3. Plague-infected fleas. Bombs, planes, and tanks were not the only deadly weapons used in World War II. Biological weapons, as we know, are just as lethal, or even more so than conventional weapons. In one of the most horrifying acts carried out by the Imperial Japanese Army on its enemies, their military dropped fleas carrying the bubonic plague over the city of Ningbo in China. Just days after the vermin were dropped over the city center by low-flying planes, hundreds of Chinese people got infected. Records show that at least 110 people died. Bubonic plague was rife during the Middle Ages, where it killed 1/3 of Europe's population. The disease had been under control since, and some even considered it extinct. Yet, Japanese scientists of the infamous unit—
It's still not extinct, is it? You still get outbreaks of plague. It's just now they can actually deal with it.
731 not only deliberately bred fleas to carry the plague, they also had the infectious disease artificially intensified. After the war, both the United States and Soviet Union also developed their own ways of utilizing the plague as a weapon. Number 2. Project Habakkuk. One of the craziest plans thought up during the war was to build an aircraft carrier on top of an iceberg. The idea, named Project Habakkuk, came from British inventor Geoffrey Pike, who figured that by leveling off the top of a large enough iceberg and hollowing out its inside, a landing platform made of pykrete could be built there. The Allies at the time were looking for ways to cover the Atlantic Ocean with more planes to hunt and destroy German U-boats. Additional landing and supply platforms in the middle of the sea would be of great benefit, which prompted the idea of Project Habakkuk. After research was done on the matter, a final design was proposed of a giant carrier 600 meters long, complete with an extensive cooling system to prevent the ice from melting. The project, however, was halted due to practical reasons, such as the huge cost involved in building and maintaining such an enormous structure.
I was going to say, it just sounds really impractical. Like, really impractical. Hollowing out an iceberg. No. Immediately no.
Aircraft carriers, although less cool, were just more practical in theory. Number 1. Chevera Gustav and Dora railway guns. Adolf Hitler had a fascination for big weapons, as it showed off the might of his Wehrmacht army. The best example for this was the Chevera Gustav, an 80-centimeter caliber supergun that required twin sets of railway tracks to support it. The enormous weapon was thought up in the late 1930s to be used in Germany's battle against France, and was explicitly built to destroy what were then the strongest fortifications in existence, the French Maginot Line. Weighing an incredible 1,350 tons and standing at a height of 11.6 meters, the Gustav was officially World War II's largest and heaviest gun. When tested, it proved capable of firing 7-ton shells as far as 47 kilometers. But when the Battle of France began, the Gustav was not deployed, as it wasn't ready. Still, the Nazis' swift blitzkrieg campaign through Belgium quickly got them through the French defenses, creating a victory without the need to destroy the strong fortifications. The Gustav was later deployed at the Eastern Front.
France surrendered, so...
against the Soviets. The large weapon had to be transported in several pieces and then assembled on a prepared emplacement. The procedure required 4,000 men, and the Nazis deployed an entire anti-aircraft regiment along with special troops to protect the huge piece of artillery. During the bombardment of Sevastopol, it fired 42 shots and managed to destroy, among other things, a munitions depot buried in layers of rock under a bay. A similar gigantic railway gun named Dora was later produced by the Germans and deployed briefly in the Battle of Stalingrad. It was assembled and ready to fire, but was quickly withdrawn when the Soviets started advancing. Near the end of the war, both the Dora and Gustav railway guns were dismantled by the Germans, who didn't want them falling into enemy hands.
Towards the latter half of the Second World War, the Third Reich Army...
Well, there you go. Jeez. There you are. Some shocking World War II weapons you've never heard of. I'd heard of some of them, but that was pretty cool. Which one was your fave? I liked the little tanks. Thought they were sweet. I'm very angry about the dogs though. I'm still very angry about the dogs. I don't like people using animals like that. But shout out to They Will Kill You. Video will be linked in the description. And don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you very soon.